let's give there is an entity. The Bible is what we're working our moral absolutes off of, and the Bible is man's interpretation of the words of this other entity. So therefore, it's what man believes is important.
All of my Muslim friends agree totally with me that there are moral absolutes. Not because they consult the Bible, they obviously consult the Quran. But instead, it's the Muslim worldview, it's the Jewish worldview, it's the Christian worldview that allows for a moral absolute, because Muslims, Jews, and Christians are convinced, indeed, there is a God who defines those moral absolutes. Now, obviously, the disagreement is the Quran inspired by God? Is the Torah inspired by God? Is the New Testament inspired by God? That's where the disagreement comes, obviously.
Okay, but you're not answering my question.
How am I not answering it?
My question is this. If the Bible is a human being's interpretation of the words of another entity, and human beings aren't perfect, we accept that. And so therefore, if it's a human being's interpretation, it's what they feel is important of those words of that other entity. So therefore, what they feel is, couldn't there be a natural state of what people feel is important? I mean, couldn't someone who is an atheist choose what they feel is important?
So if the Bible and the Quran, if all those books that claim to be accurate revelations of God's will are inaccurate, then we're left simply with our consciences to understand what God has defined as being right and wrong.
So do you believe a conscience is only a construct that you can gain through religion?
No, I'm convinced that every atheist, every agnostic, every theist has a conscience. It's one of my pieces of evidence for the existence of God. We are moral people who insist upon making distinctions between right and wrong, justice and injustice. It's one of my pieces of evidence that we're more than just matter and energy.
So then why can't an atheist have a moral absolute if their conscience tells them that murder is wrong?
Because their head, their intellect is telling them there is no God. And if there is no God, there is no mind prior to the human mind that defines the moral absolute. Instead, it's the human mind that defines morality, which means it's relative, depending upon which human being you're talking to.
I have
Unless
a
they believe
question.
in that.
Well, what's the basis of natural law?
I have a question.
I am trying to rip apart the smoke screen that people put between themselves and Christ.
In my afterlife, I'll worry about that later. This life right now, I'll worry about right now.
I can't put my trust in something that was written 2,000 years ago.
And a bunch of us are running away from God, are running away from Christ as fast as we can.
You must save yourself. No one will do it for you.
Maybe what you believe or I believe is the misinterpretation.
Don't take it from me. Go to the source document, the Gospels, and read about Jesus for yourself. If you genuinely want to know Christ, He's not going to play hide and seek with you. You'll find Him.
You think words can describe God? You think the chaos of the universe can be described in words?
And I am very grateful that when God wanted to communicate most clearly, He didn't do it by skywriting. He did it through words, by becoming a human being, Jesus of Nazareth, and speaking human language. And the New Testament is written originally in Greek. We have over 5,000 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript of the New Testament, and they're very accurately translated into English.
They haven't been, and they've been proved not.
Well, the New
I mean, they
American
have evidence of all the mistranslations.
Oh, yeah, like which one?
The Septuagint, for example, in Egypt, in Alexandria.
Yeah.
They translated the original 5 books. Jewish rabbis translated it into Greek. And that was what the Christian, the church made, that was their version, that was their translation, the Septuagint. And then they found all kinds of mistakes. For instance, the word virgin, the exact meaning of the word virgin. All right? In Hebrew, virgin means young woman, not virgin woman. I mean, it gets to the very root of all the arguments. It's the translation. So you can't argue that the semantics aren't in flux. The meaning's not concrete. The very basics of Christianity is an argument here.
The basics of faith in Christ do not have to do with a difficult linguistic problem. Jesus Christ lived, taught, died, rose from the dead. That is not linguistic quibbling. It's very clearly set forth. There's no problem understanding that.
In a mistranslated document.
It's not mistranslated. The New
It has been.
Testament is
It's
very
been proven.
accurately
They have
translated.
documents.
Pardon?
They have documents.
The
You go
point
to
isn't whether
museums.
it's been mistranslated or not. The point is there are different ways to translate it. And since we, the humans, are the judges of this divine thing that's come down and told us what to do, how do we know which one? I mean, in the end, isn't it all relativism? Isn't it all who do we listen to? Which sect of Christianity? Which person, even if that person is his own individual sect, do we listen to? Isn't that the ultimate question?
It'll be a very sad day at Columbia when I can stand out here and say, I'm a follower of Christ. Walk up to him, smack him in the face, and have you say, man, I understand, that's just your own translation of Jesus. That'll be really sad. You don't have to have a PhD in Greek or in English or in the Bible to know very clearly that Jesus communicates you better love people and you better respect people. And if you go around smacking people arbitrarily, that's wrong. It'll be a very sad day at Columbia if I can stand out here and say I'm a follower of Christ, then go out and womanize, and you say, well, I understand that's one of the translations. No. Very clearly, Jesus Christ commands his followers not to commit sexual immorality. And you can't go around saying, well, it's all relative, man, it's all an issue of translation. That's a cop-out. And you know it's a cop-out, because don't you get upset with Christian hypocrites? Well, whenever you guys use the word hypocrite...
I don't get upset. I think...
No, that's sad. I wish you would get upset.
I'm not upset, because I don't think
You're not upset with a white Christian? Remember the KKK who says, I follow Jesus and black people are inferior? You don't get upset with that?
Not at all.
Well, I sure do. Why? Because Jesus commands his followers to love and respect all people. And if I think I can say, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and this black person's trash, well, I'm out to lunch. I'm out of touch with Jesus. Clearly.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they hate black people. You know, because they're not looking towards themselves for their consciousness. They're looking towards a book. And
What
they're
does
lost
that
from
mean?
the beginning.
What
it
does
means
that
they're
mean?
lost because they're not looking at themselves. They're not looking
Well, what do
towards
you see
themselves.
when you look at yourself?
When I look at myself,
Yeah,
I seek peace.
you do.
Yes.
Just peace.
I'm not always getting it, but I'm seeking it.
Uh-huh.
And that's myself. Okay?
Okay.
And people that seek Jesus, they're doing it with themselves. They're making choices from themselves. They're using a crutch, as Nietzsche would say. They're using a crutch. But it's all from themselves. And they're making decisions from themselves. That's where it comes from. Not from some book, not from some word.
Okay, when I look at myself, I see a Jekyll and Hyde. I see a mixed-up kid. At times I do what's good and I'm proud of that, and at other times I do what's evil and I'm embarrassed by that and I experience guilt. Now maybe I'm different from you, but when I look at myself, I don't just see this pristine guy who always does what's right. I see a mixed-up kid who at times does what's right, but at other times it does what's wrong. That's why I need outside help.
More
That's why I
semantics.
need Jesus
Good,
Christ.
bad, more semantics.
Semantics?
Yeah, more words.
Oh yeah?
It has no
Tell
meaning.
that to my wife.
Go to Jupiter and say it. It has no meaning.
Tell that to my wife, that, well, no. When you say that Cliff is being selfish, and when you say that he's lost his temper and that's wrong, that's just words and semantics.
It is.
Come on, man. You gotta be kidding me.
No, I'm not.
Tell an African American that the KKK's words, oh, that's just semantics.
It is.
No, it's not.
That's why we have freedom of speech, because it really doesn't mean
It's
anything.
not just semantics.
As long as you don't.
If I
hurt it.
tell a racist joke, if I demean woman with a sexist joke, that's not just semantics.
Yes, it is. And that's why I have no problem with it.
That's
I
scary.
have no problem with it. Words,
And yet I love
stick and
your
stone.
consistent relativism. I love it. You're being consistent.
I don't want to be consistent. I want to be inconsistent, like the nature of the universe, like the chaos that we live in. I don't want consistency. I don't want your doctrine.
That's right,
I
I know.
don't want consistency.
All right, fine. So it really doesn't matter whether I go up to this guy and say, hey man, you're an idiot because you're a tattoo, or if I say, hey man, I'd like to get to know you, I think you're really neat. It's all just semantics.
You keep talking about the need or the necessity or the benefits that come through embracing a God.
Yes.
And you say the nature of this world is despair. Is the nature of this world misery?
If there is no God, the logical consequence of that worldview is despair. There's no hope. Morality is relative. It doesn't matter whether I slit his throat or give him money for a meal. It's whatever I choose to do, and whatever I say is legitimate for me is legitimate.
Can man do anything worthwhile without embracing God?
Yes, because in reality there is a God who has created human beings with worth, and when my atheist friends work at the soup kitchen and serve street people, that is absolutely good. And when my atheists give money to hurting people, that is absolutely good. Why? Because although they deny the existence of God, their conscience is kicked into gear, and they're doing that which is absolutely good.
They'll still go to hell.
A person goes to hell simply because they chose to live their life separate from God. And God is not in the business of forcing anybody to go to heaven to spend eternity with Him who doesn't want to. He honors our free will.
Why have a division? Why divide people at the end? Why is there a necessity of having a hell where people suffer forever? If God is intrinsically good and the causer of all good things, then why have a hell where people burn forever?
You bet. Great question.
People who aren't necessarily Christian, people who never heard of the Christian doctrine, nonetheless go to hell and suffer for eternity.
Okay, you raised a few good issues. First point, God created me to love Him. I don't have to love Him. I can hate His guts. I can dig a ditch between Him and me. I don't have to be His friend. Jesus reveals that God created me to be His friend, created me to love Him. Similarly, I don't have to love God. I can hate God. But if I choose to exercise my free will and hate God, God's not going to force me against my will to love Him. I'm free to remove myself from His friendship. I'm free to remove myself from God's friendship. That's my decision because I'm a free, autonomous individual, created that way by God. The only reason people go to hell is because they choose to live their life separate from God. And God honors their request for eternity. Now, the Bible never says that people who don't hear about Jesus are all going to hell. Quite to the contrary. In the New Testament, we have a partial list of people who will be in heaven who obviously never heard about Jesus. Hebrews chapter 11 in the New Testament lists some of these people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Rahab, a Gentile prostitute. Obviously, they never heard about Jesus. They were born hundreds of years before Him. But in humility, they put their faith in God, and they'll be in heaven.
I don't believe in Jesus as a person, but I believe in Jesus as influencing many people's lives and influencing them in a good manner.
Kind of like
personally
Socrates?
don't see Him as my savior, but I can certainly understand other people as seeing Him as.
Okay, who is a more reliable Savior than Jesus?
I don't have one, I suppose. I don't think there is a more reliable one. I guess He's reliable for the people who work, and He's the most reliable for them.
If the marshmallow man on my left hand right here, this one, the marshmallow man right here, helps me get through life, do you think that's good?
Yeah.
If slaughtering people in Tibet makes me feel good and helps me get through life better, you think that's good?
No.
Why?
Well, there are lots of other ways of hurting them, but I don't think anybody would argue that causing physical pain is not hurting.
Ma'am, I don't care what other people would argue. I get my jollies from slaughtering people in Tibet. What's wrong with that? I hope you're not going to be so judgmental to tell me that that's wrong. Are you?
Sure. Why not?
Good. Well, why are you going to be so judgmental that you're going to tell me that slaughtering people in Tibet is wrong?
We were raised differently to think that that every person deserves a happy life, including a free one in their own country.
Thanks for your honesty. So what I hear you telling me is the reason that slaughtering people in Tibet is wrong is because you happen to grow up in a society that taught you that the way to happiness is to treat people nicely.
Certainly.
Well, what happens if I'm not brought up in your society? What happens if my cultural environment teaches me that slaughtering Tibetans is the way for real happiness?
Then certainly you're of the minority. Most societies believe that you should lead a happy life, and many people are taught the way that I've been taught.
So, truth is determined by majority opinion, and because I'm in the minority that feel that slaughtering Tibetans is the way to happiness, I'm wrong because the majority of people think that the way to real happiness is to not slaughter them.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, the majority might believe in happiness for the Tibetans. The majority also believes in the majority always rules. It's the way society works.
In the 1960s, the majority of white people thought black people were inferior. Majority rules does not always mean right.
True, but if you have to look at the different cases. I mean, if it means happiness for a person, certainly the majority ruling in the 1960s was incorrect.
But it made white people happy.
It's hard to explain. I
No, ma'am, it's not that hard. Come on, it's real easy. It's all relative, isn't it, according to your worldview?
Yes.
Right.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. So it really doesn't matter, does it? It's all meaningless, isn't it? It's all just a crapshoot, really, if you get down to it. I mean, my birth is an accident, my death is an accident. Logically follows the only thing between those two accidents is another accident. Me. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you want to march for the freedom of Tibet, wonderful. And if I want to march for slaughtering more Tibetans, equally wonderful. It's all relative.
I guess so. I wouldn't call your marching wonderful.
Right, but that's just your own thing. That's your trip. My trip happens to be different. And you certainly wouldn't want to be so judgmental to tell me that my particular trip was wrong, would you?
In our opinion, it's wrong, yes.
It's in our...
Well, then all of a sudden you're not being so wonderful moral relativist that you guys like to claim to be, are you?
You consistently live by your morals. Your morals stay the same. You can consistently live by them. You consistently have to live by change your decisions and what you do by what they are, but you should live your life by what you say. Live it by.
Yeah, but see, it sounds like what you're telling me is, Cliff, morality's relative. But come on, bud, you and I down deep really do know what's right. And we really do know that massacring Tibetans or massacring people in Kosovo is not good.
Exactly.
Yeah, but ma'am, you can't have it both ways. If morality's relative, then it's not true that massacring Tibetans is absolutely wrong. It's just relatively wrong. Right?
You can't say that the deaths of people are relatively wrong.
If you're a moral relativist, you cannot say that murder's absolutely wrong.
It's the age-old good versus evil debate. You can't...
Yeah, but if your conclusion to that age-old debate of good versus evil is that it's all relative, so therefore there is no debate, then that's your conclusion, and you can't then say, but this is absolutely wrong and this is absolutely right.
Obviously, not all the Gospels were written at the same time. One was written first, and the other ones were written off of that. And the first one was a forgery. I mean, that's to me completely possible.
Okay, but I love the way Luke deals with that whole issue of hallucination in Luke 24. While they were still talking about this, the disciples, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. I mean, they think we're losing it. We're hallucinating. He said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." Well, I love that kind of honesty in the text. These guys thinking, whoa, we're losing it.
Well, see, that's a circular argument because you're using the Bible to support what you're arguing. And my whole question is, you can't, I mean, it's all about the miracles. You need the evidence. And
Yes, sir.
You can't say
But
that...
my point is, one of the issues that convinces me that a gospel is reliable is brutal honesty on the part of the author about his own sins, his own doubts. I mean, if an author writes his glowing account of himself, and that he never has doubts, and everything's fine, and no sin, and no problems, I get suspicious about the guy's credibility. But when I see that he's in touch with his own foibles, his own mistakes, his own weaknesses, his own sin, evil, I like that. I mean, you read those Gospels. Do you know that's the leader of the first century church, Peter, whose sins, whose doubts are pictured in living color in the Gospels? That lends credibility, doesn't it?
Well, to me, credibility doesn't really matter so much on the author himself. I mean, you can have pretty much a dishonest person who's, let's say, a great scientist, because he bases his work on the evidence. And whether if he's right or not, other people can support or attack him. I mean, to me, it's just about evidence. You got to look at the evidence. Is it good enough to believe in something for which we have no experience of otherwise?
Okay, well, help me. What would you need to be convinced that Jesus rose from the dead?
What would I need?
Right.
It would take quite a lot. I would need probably some kind of appearance, a guy opening the heavens, speaking to me, and I being sure that I wasn't on drugs, hallucinating, dreaming, and so forth. But it's just not going to happen, right? I mean, it's just like Descartes, right? You know, you have to, there's a checklist to make sure. Well, am I not dreaming? There are lots of many different explanations before I believe that some strange, it could be the simplest thing. If I let go of this paper and it floats in air, that would be, and then I hear a voice. It's not going to happen.
Try it.
It's not going to violate the law of nature.
So Jesus doesn't exist then?
My whole point is that, I believe in the law of gravity. right? Because I have evidence that when I drop things, they fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. While I don't have that same similar evidence for believing in something that's supposedly much more important to the resurrection of Jesus.
And you don't have the same type of evidence that your roommate is not going to stick a knife in your back tonight that you do when it comes to dropping a piece of paper.
No, I think
But just because you don't have that much evidence, that same type of evidence, does not mean that you cannot trust your roommate.
Well, you're talking about like this is inductive evidence, right? Which is based on the amount of data.
No, you talked about importance, okay? The importance of the issue demands more evidence. Fine. The evidence is that this thing drops, right? The evidence is that gravity works. Sir, my relationship with my wife is far more important than whether that thing drops right now. But I can promise you, sir, I do not have the same type of evidence that my wife is committed to me that I do that that's going to drop. Now, if I turn to my wife and say, you have to give me the same type of evidence that you're going to be committed to me that I get when I drop this thing, I'm going to be one very lonely person.
No, that's true.
Human relationships are a lot different from the law of gravity.
Right. However, in the case of Jesus' resurrection, what that is a denial of a law of nature, right? Which is the equivalent to the law of gravity. Say the fact that once something dies, it cannot come back to life, right? Or if you want to call it organic chemistry, I don't care what. And the point is that the evidence has to be so strong to refute all the other evidence.
But if you allow for the possibility of a supernatural God, then you've got to allow that supernatural God to choose to intervene at one point in history and perform a miracle. And if that miracle happened 2,000 years ago, just because it's not on video, doesn't justify me rejecting it. Just because it happens to be written by eyewitnesses and not be on video, doesn't justify me in rejecting it.
Well, see, the question is, but you obviously accept that, but not, like I said, other miracle claims of other religions, and then you say because, well, Muhammad's not as good of a person, so therefore you don't believe in the miracles that the Quran describes.
I never said that.
Well, you said you have to look at his character and whether he's trustworthy or not.
Right. And if the evidence is that Muhammad moved a mountain, then I'll follow that and believe that Muhammad moved a mountain. But the question, am I going to trust Muhammad to tell me the truth about God, is different. I mean, the Bible talks about a lot of people who perform miracles, and they're in touch with a supernatural power that's coming from the wrong place. I mean, I went to a New England prep school, and we had a philosophy professor, and this guy came into our class and mocked the idea of a supernatural devil. Said, you guys are intelligent enough to believe in no supernatural devil exists. 2 months later, the guy returned to our philosophy class and said, I have an apology to make. I now am part of the occult. I went to a seance, and a medium told me things about my past it took me 2 weeks to remember. I've gone to your synagogues and mosques and churches. I've never seen supernatural power. I go to a seance, and I see supernatural power. I'm part of the occult. Yeah, there are 2 mistakes we can make in our thinking about the devil. One is to think too little of him. Hey, the little dude in the red jumpsuit, with a little black pitchfork. Ha, 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 what a joke. Yeah, what a joke. But the other mistake is to make too much of him and to worship him. And there is supernatural power in this Satan.
Well, the question is, what about that? What about that man you're talking about? Why don't you believe there are such things as seances?
I do.
You believe that like people have these paranormal abilities?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. There are some incredibly warped, weird things that happen in the area of seances and the occult.
Name me one person who gives seances who's believable, who's been verified. I mean, Houdini proved that. I forget the name of the woman, the most famous, I guess, seance giver of her day. He proved that she was using, trickery.
Well, yes, sir. Their folks use trickery in everything. No question about that. No, I don't believe that every person who says I've got supernatural power has that. Obviously, I believe there are a lot of magicians out there and charlatans. No question about it. But I think there also is real supernatural power, and I think that it's especially on display in cultures where that power is really embraced.
Can you give me an example?
Yes, I worked in Haiti for a while, among low-income people in Haiti there, building some schools. And there is some supernatural power in voodooism that is kind of scary for me. I don't...
With zombieism? Like, you believe there are zombies?
I don't know about zombies.
I mean, scientists have recently shown that people who appear to die and come back to life have been given very
very strong sedatives that make them sleep for a week or more at a time,
Sure.
and they miraculously come back to life.
Right.
It's not. There's no paranormal powers involved.
No, I am convinced. All right, read People of a Lie by M. Scott Peck. I think M. Scott Peck builds a tremendous case there in that book that indeed there is some type of satanic power in this world. And the way he does it really is by looking at a thing like the My Lai massacre and asking, do we think that that's just human beings at work there, or do we think there's something more involved? That type of grotesque evil. Fascinating book, People of a Lie, M. Scott Peck.